Fantasy basketball draft season is nearly over and we are nearly starting the NBA season, which begins week 1. Today we're going to break down all the action, go through some advice, some streaming options, and what you should be on the lookout for. Let's go!
Jordan open. Chicago with the lead. Bryant to Shaq.
Not a game. We talking about practice.
LeBron James with no regard for human life. Anything's possible.
Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang!
Curry for three. Wow! Unbelievable. Making it rain in New York.
We the North are now we the champions.
Not the destination, it's the journey. Mamba out.
G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy. And today we are going through week 1 of the NBA schedule and previewing the beginning of the fantasy basketball season and talking about some strategies for week 1, some do's and do nots, and also just going through, again, this is going to be a weekly reoccurring segment where each, I think I'm going to be doing it on a weekend basis, so I believe on when am I going to do it? On a Saturday night for US time, Sunday morning for Australia time. I'm going to be doing a preview ahead to the week that is and talking about all the streaming options, the schedule for things to consider when you're talking about daily changes leagues and weekly changes leagues, and just all the weird and wonderful things that are coming up for that week in the NBA. Any major sort of news and things will also break on that show as well. So today we're going to get stuck into it. Before we do though, guys, I just want to give a massive shout out and a huge thank you to everyone who has been listening, watching, supporting the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast over the preseason. It's been a massive, massive effort. I try to put a lot of effort into bringing you guys the best quality content, also trying to ramp up the volume of content. I've tried to do a lot more points leagues this year. I've tried to do a lot more varied content, some new ideas, and the new series in the top 25 most interesting, which was a decent, it took a lot of work. A podcast every single day is not an easy thing to do, especially when it is not your job and you have other life and work commitments to do. So I do appreciate everyone who has supported the podcast. I extra appreciate everyone who's gone over to ballboysnba.com and got their season guide. Hopefully you've had your draft, or if you haven't had your draft, hopefully it goes well. Hopefully if you had your draft, it went well. And you've at least got a team that you can walk away with and feel happy about and feel like you've got something fun to look forward to this NBA season. And a lot of the money that you guys have spent on the season guide will be used very, very wisely, I hope, on bringing back more value to you guys. Everyone who has been a supporter of the podcast, I think you guys will get tremendous value out of what I'm going to reinvest that money in. I'm going to make the website bigger and better in future seasons. We're going to bring better content, better graphics and scenery and all sorts of things. It's going to be all reinvested back into the podcast so that I can be... my goal is to be the best fantasy basketball analyst in the world. It is a big goal. It obviously has a lot of great people in it, a lot of people that I admire greatly, but with all of your support, it makes it a lot easier, guys. So first of all, just a big, big thank you to everyone who's consumed the content over the preseason. We will be doing plenty of content throughout the season. Just to give you a quick preview on a week-to-week basis, we're going to be doing at least 3 shows on YouTube. We'll be doing every Wednesday US time. I'm going to be recapping the Wednesday slate of games. Normally the Wednesday games, there's usually a high volume of games, 10 to 12 on most Wednesdays each week. So I'm going to be recapping a lot of those, which will help me sort of stay in tune with what's happening on a day-to-day basis. We'll be able to talk about a lot of players in that one show, any major things that are happening or previous to that week. We'll also do a weekly preview, which is what this show is going to be after I stop rambling on in the intro. And we will also be doing a once or twice a week, depending on, what is happening in the NBA, of sort of rotating themed shows. So it might be some buy lows, some sell highs. I hope to give a monthly update to my Dynasty rankings and my thoughts for Dynasty content. So if you are a Dynasty League manager, if you're in several Dynasty Leagues, I want to be doing more Dynasty content this season. It is a big passion of mine. I love Dynasty Fantasy Basketball. So we're going to be doing a lot of that, which is a Dynasty Focus podcast, probably once a month. Again, I don't like to change my opinion opinions too frequently because that leads to over-analyzing. And then once a week on the ballboysnba.com subscribers, anyone who's a platinum subscriber, you guys can get in contact with me. I'm going to be reaching out to a bunch of you guys soon to get in contact with you to do a weekly Q&A podcast. And that will be up on Fridays, I think. So Friday my time, Thursday night your time. So get your questions in by the end of the Wednesday games before, or basically when I do the recap show. I'll remind you guys to get your questions in, and I will be answering them exclusive for those who are subscribers to the Ball Boys season guide. You will still continue to get benefits throughout the entire season. It doesn't stop just at your draft. You've already paid for it. There's no ongoing fees or anything like that. You've already paid for it, so it's just going to be something that you guys can get access to for the rest of the season. So that's what the season's going to look like when it comes time to, if there's a trade that breaks down or the trade deadline shows or anything like that. We'll be doing some extra shows throughout the season, but that is basically what the regular week-to-week schedule is going to look like. So far, the last couple of months, I've been basically doing a show every day or multiple 2 or 3 shows every day. That will not be able to keep up. I want to be able to do the best, most up-to-date content for you guys, and with me still working a job, that needs to be more sort of 3 times a week rather than every single day. So hope you guys can appreciate that. And let's stop waffling on. Sorry for the long intro, but I wanted to set up the season. Wanted to thank you guys properly. But let's get stuck into week 1. What should we be doing? All right, week number 1. The preview. Now, first, before we go into the streaming and, looking at the actual week itself, I want to talk general week 1 strategy, because a lot of you guys, if you're new to fantasy basketball, or again, it's always a good reminder as well, a lot of wild shit happens in week 1. And the basics, so the schedule we'll talk about in a section, but the schedule is always really, really weird. It's jam-packed on several days and really low volume on other days. So in the second day of the NBA calendar, where there's a 12-game slate, spoiler alert, there's going to be so many news, stat lines, people shooting insane percentages, people having terrible games, and there are going to be so many people reacting. Twitter's going to be all ablaze if you're over on there and following, which, again, by the way, reminder, follow me on Twitter, because, and again, we'll talk about this in a second, because that's where I'm going to be dropping my advice for anything that breaks, like the Steven Adams injury, like the injury news that we saw on Tari Eason. I'm going to be dropping my quick hitting analysis over there, and then in these podcasts, we're going to talk about it. But if you're not following me on Twitter, at BallBoysFantasy, make sure you are, because that's where you're going to get my first initial advice. Don't wait until later, especially if your league is first in, first serve sort of thing. So, side note, follow me on Twitter. But anyway, there's going to be so many reactions. So, I've gone out of order here. But make sure when you're in week 1, do not overreact to the first game or the first 2 games. There are going to be some wild things happening. The biggest question I want you guys to be asking yourself when you're consuming the content that you're going to be watching, when you're looking at the box scores and the stats, is this something that can sustain? Is this repeatable? I always remember, I think it was a couple of years ago, it was Nemanja Bjelica came out in the first game. I think he was playing for the Warriors at the time. Put up a great stat line, and everyone was saying, he's the number one. You must go and add this guy. He put up a great line, but it was always a situation where he shot so well. I think someone was in foul trouble or something like that. He got extended minutes, and it was a flash in the pan. That was his best performance of the entire year on the first game. Never put anything close to that line ever again for the rest of the season. So always remember and always ask yourself, is this repeatable? Is this something that this person is going to be able to do on a consistent basis? Is there anything different or unusual? Is there an injury, or was someone in foul trouble, or was he shooting 80% from the three-point line, or whatever the case may be? Always ask yourself that, and don't overreact to good performances. Don't overreact to bad performances as well. We're trying to look at the back end of our roster, the back end of our players, and look at the rotations, the position battles, looking for things that, okay, he's never done that before. This is looking different, or things that you're going to sort of pick up and notice along the way. I'm going to be there to help you. The first week we're going to be going, I think probably the first 3 or 4 days of the NBA, I'm going to be doing a reaction or a box score recap for every single day for the first few days. I won't be doing that throughout the entire season, but it is important to sift through all of that information because it's going to be coming hard and fast in those first few days, especially that second day once all the players start going. So number one thing, it was second on the dot point here on YouTube, but do not overreact to all the craziness that is the fantasy basketball opening day on Wednesday, your time, Thursday, my time. Week one, I'm prioritizing upside over streaming. A lot of the time, I'm okay losing the first 1 to 2 weeks in my fantasy matchups on head-to-head leagues because I am trying to prioritize players who are going to have upside. I am patient personally. I'm a very patient person when it comes to, evaluating my fantasy players. I would rather miss out on a guy who is, a potential ad in week one or a short-term ad than I would drop a player that is poor to begin with but blows up later to get that player. So a good example for this was last year. D'Anthony Melton was a player that I drafted in many leagues. He was a player that I was high on. I drafted him late in a lot of spots, and at the start of the season, he was playing poorly. He was playing low minutes, but I held him for a while. I think I held him for another 3 weeks, and then luckily for me, again, these things can happen, but luckily for me, that player went down. I believe early on it might have been either James Harden or Tyrese Maxey went down. D'Anthony Melton moved into the starting lineup or got a boost in minutes, and he was basically a top 60 player for a large stretch of the season. I was rewarded for my patience there. The thing that I would always stress is if you're dropping someone who has a lot of upside, you better be adding someone that has a lot of upside as well. Now, this is where we start to discuss different types of leagues. Are you in a shallower league? Are you in a 12-team league, a 14-team league? Is your league super competitive? Do you have IR spots? How deep is your bench? There's a lot of different factors involved, but the biggest thing I always preach is I am prioritizing upside. I'm looking long-term at the start of the season, and I'm not going to drop someone that I believe has high potential for a short-term gain in the early weeks of fantasy basketball. The third point here is a little bit contradictory to that, but know who your worst player is. You also need to know how valuable your worst player is, and that will be different for every team, every league, and every situation. But on your team, it is important to identify who your worst players and maybe who is your worst 1 to 3, who is your bottom 1 to 3 players. So, for example, if you're in a team, and I'm going to use my FBI World Cup team, for example, I've made ads on this league. I've got 2 players sitting in IR spots who have the ability to sit there. I've gone and added some players because, the more, bites at the cherry we can have, the more swings we can have at this, the more informed we're going to be. And then I need to, from that, decipher, who is my worst player? If there's going to be someone who pops off, who is the guy that I'm going to drop to quickly go and add that person? Especially if you're in a league where it's first come, first serve, there's no fab bidding or anything like that. You need to be able to act quickly and know who you're going to drop before the fact to get that player. Now, you can ask questions on here, but again, a lot of the times, you'll need to be quick. So beforehand, you need to identify who is your worst player and who is the player that has the lowest upside. Who is the player, and this is the way I'd like to phrase it to myself, who is the person I'm going to regret the least if I drop them and someone else picks them up? Do I have 2 players at the back end of my roster? Both are performing poorly, but one guy, if something goes right, he can really pop off. One guy is solid, is okay, but there's not really much path for him to really improve. Then I'm probably going to drop that second guy before the first guy because I'm always trying to look for, especially in a competitive league where you need to be at the top of your game, you're always trying to look for those guys who have high upside, high potential. The more time and the more data we can collect, the more we can confidently say, okay, this person with high potential, it's not happening for them. It's not happening for them anytime soon, and then we can drop them. But always, I try to be very patient this first week. I don't make any rash moves about those kind of things. Last point here is that if you don't have anyone like that, or if you're in a deeper league, a 14-team league, 16-team league, or you're in a really competitive draft and a lot of those really high upside guys went and then you had to spend your last couple of picks on, some guys that are highly questionable and things like that. So, for example, in that FBI Fantasy Basketball World Cup draft, some of my back-end players are guys like Christian Wood was the guy who I drafted with my last pick. I've picked up Bilal Koulibaly, someone like Taylor Horton-Tucker is a guy that I added as well. So a few of those guys I know at the back end of my roster are there for me to have a look at. Once I get a few days of data, or if there's a really obvious candidate who's on the waiver wire that has a higher upside than those guys, I'm going to be quick to make the change. But if you have some people that I clearly, so for me, it's Christian Wood. On this team, I don't really have high hopes for Christian Wood, especially if he's not starting on no opening night. If he's not starting, I'm pretty okay with dropping a player like that because I don't really see a high level of upside with the abundance of bigs on that team. So for me, if I had the ability to, I could use Christian Wood's spot as a streaming spot, and we're going to start to look at that in today's podcast. All right, let's get into the streaming and the preview for week 1. So like we said earlier on, week 1 is weird. There is a weird schedule of games. It always is like this. Personally, I would love to see that Wednesday and Thursday games like even out. I would also probably prefer to see more than 2 games on the first day. I don't know, that's just me. But anyway, the first game, 2 games. There's always 2 games. Wednesday, we've got the big actual first day of fantasy basketball. This is where all the news is going to be going crazy. And on Wednesday, we have 12 games of fantasy basketball. So we're going to talk about this later, but chances are on that Wednesday, you are not going to be using some players. There are going to be more players on your team playing than there will be starting roster spots. So you will need to decide who you're starting, who you're sitting. We'll talk about that in a second. Thursday, 2 games as well. So another low volume day. Friday, 11 games, another big slate of NBA games. Another weekend, we've got 7 games on Saturday, 6 games on Sunday. So what this means, the players that are playing on those low volume days on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, those are going to be the players, and we're talking more specifically for the back end of your roster. So the players that are, not guys that are your top 10 best players. You're going to have to decide, okay, are they, valuable enough for me to hold on to? And again, refer back to that first rule, which is we're prioritizing upside. I'm not one to really go and chase streamers just for the sake of winning my first week. But if you have someone expendable, decide, are you going to actually play them on Wednesday if they're on Wednesday? And we're going to talk about those teams in a second. And if you're not, then you might even be able to drop them straight away before you even start your week, and you can get in a player who's playing on a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or Sunday. So let's have a look into the schedule from here. And we're going to talk about the players or the teams, that have a 2-game week. And there's a lot of them because it's a shorter week. There's no games on Monday. So it's a shorter week. There's a lot of teams with 2 games. So the Celtics, Nets, Hornets, Mavericks, Pacers, Bucks, Timberwolves, Pelicans, Magic, and Wizards all have 2 games this week. So that is 10 teams that have 2 games in opening week. That means there are 20 games. All the other teams have 3 games this week. So again, if you're in a weekly changes league, the difference between 2 games and 3 games is fairly sizable. So going from 2 to 3, that's an increase of 50%. So, for example, if you're getting someone who's averaging 20 points and they've got a 2-game week, they play, again, hypothetically, they hit their average every time. They play 2 games, they score 40 points. If you have someone who's averaging 15 points per game, but they have 3 games that week, they play 3 times, they score 45 points. So they are the better player to play than a player playing 2 games, okay? That's different to comparing someone who is, they're playing 3 games to 4 games. If we've got the same situation, if I've got a player who's averaging 20 points, they go 20 for 3 games, that's 60. 15 points for 4 games, that's also 60. So even though there's 1 game difference in both scenarios, the difference between 2 games and 3 is bigger than the difference between 3 games and 4 games. And it's even, bigger. It goes smaller again when you go 4 to 5. So always remember those 2-game weeks, and we're going to be highlighting them every week, are really ones that in weekly changes leagues, you're going to be really on top of, and you're going to have to make some hard decisions on whether or not you start a player that you might consider to be a permanent starter on your team, get them off and put someone else in who has more games on the slate than they do. So always do keep that in mind. So again, on the screen there, if YouTube watchers, you can see that. And there's a lot of teams that play 2 games. Now, quality games. I don't know if Josh Lloyd invented this term, but I've heard it on his podcast and I've heard it a few other places as well. But just in case he did invent this term, shout out to Josh Lloyd, Locked On Fantasy Basketball. But quality games, or sometimes I'll refer to them as streamable days, streamable games, are games where you can have different cutoffs. I usually use 9 or 10. 10 would be the cutoff for like a standard 10 team, 10 starters, 3 bench. You might have 9 if you have a deeper bench because you've got more players that you could maybe fill in on those lower volume games. That is always a general rule, so we will talk about this in plenty of times during the season. You might, for example, have 5 different players on, the Lakers and the Suns or whatever, or, you've drafted every, Lakers starter or whatever. You might not be in this exact example, but in general, when you play 10, when you have a game where there's a day where there's 10 games on, you are not going to be able to add someone and use them on your starters because you're going to already have 10 players playing. So effectively, when we are streaming and adding someone for the, intent of using them for the short term to get some stats on, we are targeting the low volume games. Now, in week 1, there is a lot of weird schedules. There are, in fact, 3 teams that have 3 quality games. Now, remember, the most amount of games that any team plays is 3. So these 3 teams, on every game that they play this week, it is a quality game. It is a low volume game. And those teams are the Lakers, the Suns, and the 76ers. So if you are trying to stream for weekly changes or daily changes, these are the teams that you want to be targeting, especially early in the week when we've got those first 2 of those first 3 days only have 2 games on them. And I believe the Lakers and the Suns play on both of those games. The 76ers don't play until the 3rd day on the NBA calendar. They do not play the first 2 days. But then they have the back-to-back on the Saturday and Sunday. I believe they're the only team that does that. On the flip side of things, there are 5 teams that have no quality games, that don't have a single game this week on a day that there is streamable. So the players from the Celtics, Nets, Hornets, Mavs, and Magic, you're probably not going to use any of them this week at all on the back end of your roster. So if you have someone like Peyton Pritchard or who's someone from the Nets, maybe even a Spencer Dinwiddie if he's like your 11th guy. Who's someone maybe better on the Nets? Cam Thomas is someone that maybe you drafted. On the Hornets side of things, maybe it's Nick Richards or a Gordon Hayward. You're probably not going to use Gordon Hayward at all this week. On the Mavs side, Derek Lively is probably not going to get a run for you on the starting lineup this week. Again, he's good to have. He's got upside, so I wouldn't be dropping him, but he's probably not going to get a run for you this week on your starting roster. The Orlando Magic, you're probably not going to be using Jalen Suggs in a daily changes league. He's probably going to be sitting on your bench and you won't use him at all. So again, if you've got a player that doesn't have a high upside, like a Peyton Pritchard, you might argue with me that Cam Thomas has high upside, like a Nick Richards, or not like, I don't know, if you've got a Gary Harris or something like that. If you have one of those, guys that don't have high upsides and you were sort of getting them because they just filled a need for you and a statistical need and they are droppable and expendable from these teams, those are the types of players that you can go ahead and drop immediately and add someone from the Lakers, Suns, or 76ers because you're going to get way more use out of those players this week. So those are the quality games. And now we're going to finish off the podcast today by talking about some streaming targets. And we're going to be talking about streaming in specific categories. Now, if you're in a points league, you can still get some good value out of this, especially this first category for points. But it also gives you a good idea of some players that I think are going to have some value this week. Again, with a heavy focus on those teams that play those 3 quality games this week. So let's start by streaming points in this week. I've highlighted 3 players that you are going to want to have a look at this week. Kelly Oubre for the Philadelphia 76ers. 3 quality games. He is someone that could easily come in and score a bunch of points, especially with James Harden not likely to play. Rui Hachimura and Eric Gordon are my other 2 options. So Rui is someone who can not do much else except for score, maybe get some rebounds as well. Eric Gordon should also play good as well in terms of he's kind of, I think, the 5th option would he be the fifth? Yeah, probably the fifth scoring option behind Durant, Beal, Booker, and probably Nurkic. Or maybe he's close to Nurkic in terms of scoring. And again, if you play 3 quality games this week, it's going to be far more valuable than you streaming in someone who maybe has a better per game upside in terms of scoring, but they only play 1 quality game, maybe once on the weekend this week. Have a crack with these guys. They're going to play the first day. Even if you just get them for the first day or the first 2 days with Rory and Eric Gordon, you can then drop them after that third day in the NBA schedule and look to get someone. Maybe it's from the Philadelphia 76ers that has the back-to-back on the weekend. That's the other thing as well. In week 1, I usually like to keep at least 1, sometimes 2 ads, just because a lot of the times you're either A, going to see some players pop off and become must-add roster players for a long-term focus, or B, someone drops someone because they're too impatient and you're going to want to scoot them off the waiver wire. So for a lot of the times in week 1, I like to keep at least 1 or 2 waiver wire ads for the entire week. Only really use 1 or 2 to begin your season because, again, weird shit happens and you want to be there and available, ready to capitalize on that. So that is a really good point that I probably should have brought up earlier, but if you've hung around to now, you've got that little nugget there. Let's talk about threes in the streaming targets. Gabe Vincent, I really like for the Lakers. Grayson Allen, Eric Gordon for the Suns. Again, 3 quality games. Kelly Oubre pops up again, and Taurean Prince. So Taurean Prince might be the starter in LA as well. So you've got a few different options there. Again, a lot of guys, they're all going to be from these 3 teams, just a heads up. So I do think of all these options, Gabe Vincent is probably one of my favorites. I think that he has potential in a few categories that we're going to talk about here as well. But yeah, all of these guys can give you, 2 threes on, 3 games. You might get 6. You might get more than that. You might get 12 threes. Maybe they hit 3 threes over a stretch of 3 threes a game on average over 3 games. So, definitely some guys, if you're looking for threes, you can get some really good value. There's a few options there. Obviously, 5 plays to target. Next one here is assists. A little bit harder to get. Obviously, we know assists are... we're not up to assists. We're up to rebounds. I've skipped ahead. Rebounds. You're going to see these names come up a few times. Christian Wood, Jared Vanderbilt, Rui Hachimura, and Drew Eubanks. Of all of these players, my favorites are Christian Wood and Drew Eubanks. I think Christian Wood is, of all of the players that we're talking about in terms of streaming, I've got him on a couple of rosters just because of the off chance that he gets a 25-minute a night role. Something happens to Anthony Davis, he goes to the locker room or something like that. He can have some value. He's a good fantasy producer in limited minutes, but I do expect his minutes to be a little bit lower. Vanderbilt can get some rebounds in limited minutes as well. Rui should play a decent amount, at least maybe get you 5 or 6 rebounds. And then Drew Eubanks is another really good per-minute producer. Again, Nurkic has been known to get in foul trouble, so he could, at any one of these 3 games, have an extended run. But even in limited minutes, again, 5 to 6 rebounds is enough to expect from Drewy. Let's talk about assists, which I mentioned before. So the assists here, again, like I said, a little bit harder to come by. Again, my favorite in this group here is Gabe Vincent. So we talked about him in the 3 streaming. I like him on this assist stream as well. He's not going to be as good of an assist stream whilst the other players are healthy, but he is always someone that I've got my eye on because the health of LeBron, the health of D'Angelo Russell always comes into question a little bit there. Eric Gordon, it's not the best, but he can maybe get you sort of 2 to 3 assists per game. Maybe he gets you more than 10 assists for the week, which can be useful. And Jordan Goodwin. Jordan Goodwin is someone that, again, I don't even know if he's going to be locked into this rotation, but if he is, I mean, the Phoenix Suns don't really have a traditional point guard that they're running or locked in, but if they do, it will be him, and he is someone that puts up decent stats in limited minutes. And again, just want to have him on the radar in case they use him, but I'm a little bit less confident in him than these other 2 in terms of his projected minutes, but he is a guy that can get good stats in limited minutes. The next one here, steals. Plenty of steals targets here. Again, we'll go through them. Jordan Goodwin, again, great producer, not super confident in his minutes, but Jared Vanderbilt, Gabe Vincent, less so on the steals front. Josh Okogie is an excellent steals streamer as well. He also might play decent minutes, and if there's anything he is good at, it is steals. Jaden Springer, similar to a Jordan Goodwin. I'm not 100% sure of his minutes or role in this team, especially early on. But again, with James Harden likely not there, I expect to see him at least get an opportunity, and he is someone that I'm very high on long term, and one of his biggest strengths are steals. And then Patrick Beverley for the 76ers as well. Can't do much else, but he can at least get a couple of steals for you on any given night. So plenty of options for steals if you need to get them this week, and that will be the case for most weeks as well. Let's talk blocks. Again, very similar names, and you're going to see these guys again for field goal percentage. It's Drew Eubanks, it's Christian Wood, it's Jared Vanderbilt. If I was to rank them, it'd be Wood, Eubanks, and then Vanderbilt, in my opinion. Again, you're looking at all these players from the same three teams. Drew Eubanks can get you basically a block shot in like 15 minutes. Maybe he can block you 3 shots in a game. It's totally possible. So again, these low volume stats, they're always very good to stream. And these guys, I think, can do it. And they can also give you some good field goal percentage. So those are the exact same 3 guys that I think, again, we're picking from 3 teams because they're the only 3 teams that have low volume schedules this week, those 3 quality games. But they are some decent options to at least kickstart your week if you are attacking those categories. And in the last category, free throw percentage. Only 2 players. Again, free throw percentage is so hard to get off the waiver wire. It is so hard to get guys. They can maybe be good free throw shooters, but do they even get to the line during these games? We're not sure. They might not even attempt a free throw in some of these games. But Gabe Vincent and Grayson Allen are both guys who have a good free throw percentage. When they do go to the line, within the 3 games, you would think that they would at least get to the line a little bit and give you some free throws made that week. But again, I always stress that free throw percentage is so hard to stream and get value on off the waiver wire, which is why I preach about getting it early, not relying on these guys to swing that category. But these guys are players that if you are at least looking after your free throw percentage and maybe also looking for other stats, these guys, we mentioned them in the 3s. Gabe Vincent in the assists and steals. He's probably more assists than steals, but are really good streaming options. So my number 1 streaming target really is Gabe Vincent this week because I think he's going to have a sizable role and he can get hot and provide some really good stats in points, 3s, assists, steals, free throw percentage. He's going to be poor off the front of the field. He's not going to block shots or rebound. That's a given, but for certain teams that can definitely be extremely useful. So that is it, guys. That is week 1 preview in the books. How excited are you guys for the NBA? I am super pumped. I am so excited. I've got some time off work later in the week just to sit down, watch some basketball, and tweet like an absolute madman about all the fantasy comings and goings. My style is, at least for these first few games, I'll watch one game on the TV and then, watch it in its entirety. It'll most likely be the Celtics, and I'll probably watch Victor on that first game as well. And on my laptop, I'll have a few of the other games going. Let me know, how do you guys watch basketball, especially on those crazy days like the second day in the NBA calendar? Do you have, I remember they used to have the 4 screens on NBA League Pass. I don't think they do that anymore, but some people will have, a few different devices, a phone, a laptop, a TV. Do you flick between as soon as there's a timeout, you flick over to another game? How do you watch your fantasy basketball? Are you streaming it off a different website? I won't tell anyone. Let me know down in the comments section below there, guys. But remember, be patient, do not overreact, and make sure above all else you prioritize long-term value, capitalize on other people's mistakes. Again, thank you very much for all your support during the preseason, but let's keep it going during the regular season. I will see you guys shortly. Bye.